One of the most helpless feelings we feel as a mom is when we think we've tried everything possible to help our kids change their behavior and nothing seems to work. This is where Jeannie Ewert found herself when parenting one teenager in particular, a teenager who was getting into some serious trouble.
We tried all kinds of shut it down, tie it down. And then I tried the opposite, which was overly kind, right? Oh, she's depressed. So if I'm kind and I clean her room and we remodel her room, then that will change her. I mean, really, that's the thoughts that were coming,
Yeah.
What can I do to get her to be different than she is? What kind of punishments or rewards or whatever can I put into place? As soon as I understood that loving her exactly how she was and that I could be happy, that was the moment when it gave her all of the space to figure out who she was and who she wanted to be and feel that confidence that she was loved and she was lovable. And then everything changed.
This is the How She Moms podcast with Whitney Archibald. I'm a mother of 5 on a mission to help moms connect with your kids, manage your homes, and create your own unique version of motherhood. I curate ideas from different moms so you can pick and choose what works for you and your family. Once I was eagerly listening to a podcast about managing kids' behavior at a time when I was having big problems with one of my kids. I even felt unsafe during some of the episodes of Rage. The podcast host asked her expert guest if she could help with a big problem she was having with her kids. I was so excited I geared up for some good, applicable advice. The host went on to tell about how frustrated she was that her kids were leaving their wet and dirty clothes on the floor. I just turned the podcast off. I did not care about her dirty floor. I wanted to hear about some real problems. That was irrational, I know. I don't get to decide what other moms consider big problems. Just because my problem was a bit more intense didn't mean hers wasn't worth solving. But the hard thing is we don't often talk about our capital P problems for lots of reasons, like our child's privacy or maybe even embarrassment that that's going on. The downside of this silence, however, is that it can make us feel very alone. Like we're the only ones struggling, like our children are the only ones struggling. That's why I was so thrilled when Jeannie Ewert agreed to come on my podcast to talk about the capital P problems her second daughter struggled with as a teenager, with full permission from that daughter, who is now doing great, by the way, and loves sharing her story of how she made it through this difficult time as a way to help other teenagers and other moms. Jeannie is a mom of 7 kids from 13 to 25, so she's been raising lots of teenagers for years, which is what led her to her current career as a certified life coach, specializing in parents of teens. But she got her start as the one being coached herself.
I've had an interesting journey raising teenagers. I had one in particular that was really difficult for me. I really struggled and found myself in depression and in relation to her choices. And it was life coaching that really saved us both. So I just remember I'm thinking so many times, where's the help? I think I'm doing everything right and I'm trying all these things. Nothing is working. Where's the help for parents who are having a teenager struggle so big? That's what it was. It felt like such a big struggle. So I'm like, all right, I guess I'm going to be the help. I found the help for me, and then I'll just go and turn around and help other parents in the world. So
you can find more about Jeannie's coaching services at jeannieewertcoaching.com and follow her on Instagram at Jeannie Ewert Coaching. That's GINIEWART. Jeannie and I actually met because she asked if she could interview me about my experience parenting teenagers. She was doing research for her coaching business. I said yes, of course, but asked if I could have a turn too. So I interviewed her back. And wow, I'm so glad I asked because I learned so much from her story and her insights. And I'm excited for you to learn from her too. We'll start by just diving into her daughter's story.
So it started in 6th grade. She refused to go to school. We homeschooled her for a little while, and then she went back to public school. And then she had a time period where she was sneaking out of the house. She got involved with drugs and alcohol. She attempted suicide a couple of times. And at the height, I would say, of the experience, we were getting calls from the police a couple of times a week asking us to come pick her up from the police station or wherever it was, stealing cars. And anyway, just some serious trouble, right? Things that could theoretically impact her future in a negative way, just eliminating some of the choices that she could make. And we had tried everything. Therapy, we had some family therapy. We had a kind of a small room in our laundry room with like a sliding door that I had used for an office that was empty. We tried putting her in there and taking everything away, locking her door, locking the window, all kinds of like shut it down, tie it down. And then I tried the opposite, which was overly kind, right? Like, oh, she's depressed. So if I'm kind and I clean her room and we remodel her room, then that will change her. I mean, really, that's the thoughts that were coming,
Yeah.
What can I do to get her to be different than she is? What kind of punishments or rewards or whatever can I put into place? At the beginning, I really felt like as a parent, I had done everything right. That's what I was thinking, right? Like we went to church every week. We were reading the scriptures. We were saying prayers as family. And so I didn't understand why she could start, behaving this way. And it's funny that you mentioned Jody Moore because somebody had recommended her podcast and I was painting we were remodeling a bathroom and I was painting and I was like, I need something to listen to. Let's try this one. It was random, but totally not random.
Just to pipe in here, the podcast she's talking about is called Better Than Happy. It's hosted by Jody Moore, a fabulous life coach with an equally fabulous podcast.
And I just binged on it and I was bawling as I was painting because what I came to understand was that she could continue to behave exactly like she was and I could love her. Like there was a part of me that was like, I got to withhold this love and affection and live in judgment in order to change her. But through listening to a few podcasts and understanding that what I was creating for myself wasn't bringing me the peace that I needed in order to show up as a parent, then I said, love really was the answer. And I was talking to my other daughter about it and she said, yeah, I just remember that you were liberated by that belief. And I remember saying, I think that I should be frustrated or angry, but I'm totally not, because I was able to pay attention to the thoughts that I was having about her and all of the judgments and kind of unpack that. So I actually hired Jody as my coach to unpack some of those thoughts. And then it was about a year later that I went to the life coach school to be certified as a coach because it had just like 180 degrees transformed our family. Cassidy ended up she got pregnant at 15. And so we had a beautiful little granddaughter from that. But even that didn't devastate me because I had come to this understanding through coaching. And then, and now she has put herself through nail tech school. She's married now. She's expecting her second daughter. And it's just amazing to see the transformation that happened. And I mean, it's very simple. It's a simple idea that love is the answer and that loving someone gives them the capacity to love themselves and make decisions that are in line with who they really are, rather than, the risky behavior is really just a reflection of trying to not feel or trying to get away from a hurt. So I just say that because I decided to love her, I got to keep her. And that's the best part of the whole story.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned that it changed her too. Was that just through you, or did she listen to some of those podcasts or listen to what you were learning?
She was not in a place.
Yeah.
Right? She wasn't in a place mentally to listen to those things. And I didn't directly or intentionally try and because again, me trying to say this is the way that you should be thinking
right.
about it is still in that line of trying to change her. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But she still had some very, very deep, sad, especially when she was pregnant, she had all the hormones, just really deep sadness where she just could not control her emotions. And before coaching, I would have gone in there and tried to fix all of that. you don't need to feel sad. Let's do something to not make you feel sad. One of the beauties of coaching is that I've really come to understand where emotions come from, but also how to feel emotions. And so from that perspective, I just sat with her in that sadness, right? It's like Christ coming to us in our moments of deep despair, and he's just there with us, and he understands and has compassion, and he's willing to stay there with us as long as necessary, but also he never intends to leave us there. So my sitting there with her was full of compassion and also belief and grace that it wasn't going to last forever. And so that experience was so different than the me trying to change her. And it allowed her to understand a little bit too, like these emotions don't define me. You know, my behaviors aren't who I am. They're just a reflection of how I'm feeling. And so just like the way that she describes it is really beautiful too, that she just felt like this cavern open up where she could be who she wanted to be and explore, you know, the possibility that she was lovable, which she wasn't feeling at all before, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't even something she could express. So very interesting.
Yes, it's amazing. And so now that you know this, how have your relationships with your boys been different? So you have just two younger than her, right? Or
I have three younger than her.
Okay. And they're all boys?
Yep. They're all
okay.
boys.
So you have the two girls and they're sandwiched between the.
Yep.
Okay.
They're the boys. Yeah. So it's not a perfect process, right? Because I am still human with thoughts that try and sneak in. What coaching has brought to my experience as a parent is the recognition that I would say it's added grace into the story, right? Where before I was like, I've done everything wrong. What's wrong with me for, you know, having this experience? Now I'm like, I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be, doing the best that I can. And so are they. And sometimes it's messy and it's not exactly what I had pictured, but it's all figure outable. Like every situation that my brain still tries to run away with, like always something that we can learn from it. And so as parents, I think you nailed it when we first started talking, right? That your goal is to help them understand who they are, their purpose here, and what each experience that they have in their life, what that does to help them understand and grow as an individual.
Yeah.
And if we put a blanket rule out there, it makes our job a lot easier. Right?
Yeah, it does.
Because we're just like, no, look, people, this is the rule. But then we miss out on some of those conversations where we're helping them to think critically, helping them to access their wisdom. Really, that's what we're doing there. And when we have that conversation, and so that they can start to learn that they can make decisions, seek help when they need it, you know, recognize the support system that they have around them, understand that some other people might be able to pop in and give some advice, and then what do I do with it, you know? And the home is the perfect place for that. Hopefully we're creating that environment where it's safe and that there's compassion and love and curiosity and not judgment and frustration and anger.
Yeah. You just reminded me when my oldest first was approaching teenagerhood, I had to just like bring out my journal and I wrote out a list of things I have control over and things he has control over. And I was just making that shift to be like, okay, I need to at least transition to get him toward this part where he's in charge of a lot of these things that I used to be in charge of for him when he was a kid. And I had to like physically write that out and like shift my brain a little bit so that I could start letting go of some of the control, because we have all the control when they're infants, and then we just are gradually handing it over.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's such an interesting process, and it's It's when you have to really get your head around.
And it's so individual, right? And it's different for everyone. And so as long as we are, in a place where we're giving ourselves grace and understanding that we are just doing the best we can with the information that we have and the skills and abilities that we have right now. And so is our teenager.
And of course, we all wish we could go back in a time machine and use what we now know to raise our kids over again. But we can benefit from those who have raised teenagers before us. So as a pretty new teen mom, I would love to know what you wish you had known at my stage early on.
So my older two boys struggled with school. They got in trouble with friends, and they experimented with marijuana. And then I had a daughter who was like, I want to do everything right. And she was like night and day different. And so I've been reflecting on that experience and what, like if we had a time machine, knowing now what I could have understood about those two experiences that would have given me perspective for my daughter, who then, anyway. And really, it just seems so simple, but it really comes down to love is always the answer. Because what I was experiencing with my older two boys was kind of like, they should probably be different, but I don't have the energy. I still have little kids to try and make them be different. Right. And then when my daughter came along, I was like, yeah, see, this is what you should be doing. This is the right way to do it. And then with my next daughter, I was like, okay, now I understand that you're living the life that you shouldn't be living. You're doing everything wrong. And now I'm going to step in and try and change you. And I tried to do that through frustration and anger and rules. And she has some anxiety and depression that we had to treat with medication and therapy. And we tried those kind of things. But I made myself miserable thinking that she needed to be different, that she was doing it wrong. And the idea I had of a perfect teenager in my head was the right way to do it. And she needed to be that. So that's what I discovered through parenting her, is that each individual person, teenagers, adults, spouses, are exactly who they should be in every moment. Like, we can't even change them if we wanted to, but trying to change them only creates misery in ourselves. And then we don't show up as our best parent anyway. And so we don't even create the opportunities for them to explore a different way. As soon as I understood that part, that loving her exactly how she was and that I could be happy, that was the moment when it gave her all of the space to figure out who she was and who she wanted to be, and feel that confidence that she was loved and she was lovable. And then everything changed for her too. And that doesn't always happen, right? That's like, I feel like it was a fairy tale come true, that I changed me and then she suddenly wanted to change. But for sure, the experience for me as a parent changed so that I could then, continue to parent the rest of my kids, and it didn't destroy the rest of our family. So.
Right. Because when those situations are happening, it takes all your bandwidth. If you let it, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. You've been saying all along that just recognizing how remarkable it is that we've gotten to see this person unfold, and it's happening so rapidly in the teenage years. We should be able to occasionally stand back and let it just take our breath away, and the hard things and the good things, like, wow, they're learning so much. Wow, we're both learning so much,
Mm-hmm.
We're so good at letting toddlers take our breath away, right?
Yes.
We're not as good at realizing how remarkable and exciting teenagerhood is.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's because we start taking it a little too seriously.
Yeah.
Right. We let the worry and fear, because, we're like thinking a toddler, they've got a long way till they have to take care of themselves. And so we can just like relax and enjoy it. But there's something about a teenager being like adult shaped that we're like, oh, now it really matters, right?
Yeah.
Now the decisions that they're making really matters, and they're going to destroy their future. But if instead we just took that same perspective, like, this is so fascinating, and look at them grow, and I'm so grateful that I get to be a part of this, and what's happening is supposed to be happening, and there's no destroying futures. Like, that's just something we made up anyway, right? This is just what's happening. And if there's something that I need to step in, like with a toddler, they're writing on the walls, we're like, no, we're going to step in and we're going to stop that, right? The same thing is true with a teenager. If there's something that we need to step in, we're going to know that we need to step in and kind of intervene and give some direction. And so then, you just let go and enjoy it and recognize that we can relax a little bit.
So what does that intervention look like in a teenager if you're still allowing, because I could see one of the big arguments to your approach being like, well, how do you know when to intervene then if you're letting them be themselves? When do you intervene? When it's already dangerous, or when it's, and how do you intervene without putting down the hammer?
Well, I think that my experience recognizing what my boys were creating with their electronics is the perfect example. I was noticing some patterns of electronic use that it was a little excessive, and only because of the behaviors that I was seeing that weren't consistent with who I knew that they really were trying to be. And my brain was like, oh, I've done it wrong. We need to shut it down. We need to pull back, put some limits in place. But I took a moment to breathe and relax. I coached myself before we had the interaction, and it was a beautiful discussion, right? Because I went in not thinking that I was the queen and I knew everything and I needed to control them, but just with curiosity, compassion, and love to understand their experience and to open up the discussion so that they, could learn something from it. So night and day, how I parented before coaching and after. And I will say that that's not something that I can claim came from me. I'm going to get emotional. That was a spiritual prompting, because I'm working towards parenting from love and compassion, and also turning to my Heavenly Father for wisdom. And so when I say that it's probably time to intervene with a toddler, it might be something that's physically, like, you can see with your eyes that it's happening. And I think with our teenagers, it needs to be something that the Lord can see and He prompts us. And so if we're open with love and compassion towards our teenagers and their experience, but also ourselves, and recognizing that the Lord knows and He's willing to step in and help us, then the only thing we have to overcome, and for me, it was overcoming, oh, I'm so sorry, I did it wrong, right? So I got the prompting, and part of me was like, crap, I've created a mess. But because I am working on myself and my emotional resilience and trying to show up from love and peace, then it was a conversation. And I intervened in a way that was full of love and grace, and gave them the possibility of, our toddler might not even know that they shouldn't write on the walls. Our teenagers might not even know that what they're creating for themselves. And so that was all the intervention that was needed. I thought that it was going to be, we're going to need to have rules. And I really started that conversation a little bit on that line. And my 18-year-old was like, whoa, we haven't even talked about this. And he kind of corrected me. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Let's just have a conversation. And so then all three of them accessed their own wisdom in different ways, and they all created a different solution for themselves. My 13-year-old deleted TikTok because he could see it. once I pointed it out to him. Right? My 15-year-old just decided to set a bedtime and a waking up time. My 18-year-old set some limits, right? And I couldn't have, like, if I just did a blanket thing, it would have destroyed our relationship or impacted it in a negative way. And it wouldn't have taught them how to access their own wisdom.
Okay.
So
Yeah. I
don't know
have
if
the
that
perfect
answers
counter
that.
example. Cause
Yeah.
my son, I guess it was at fall break. So in the fall, we discovered that he had Snapchat and we kind of freaked out, as you're
Mhm.
not supposed to, I know. And we're like, I mean, of all the social medias to sneak, that's one that we're most scared about, fear again, because
Mhm.
it just deletes and you have no idea what's going on. And so we freaked out, made him delete it. Totally the opposite approach of what you just did. And then we recently just discovered that both of our two oldest sons had reloaded. Anytime I had given them the app store for just a little bit to load something that they were allowed to load, they try and sneak in whatever they can. And it's, you're really opening the possibilities to me, to thinking of how I can do this without so much control, because it's hard to have this kind of control, and it's not making me happy or them.
But it's equally hard to let go.
Yeah, it is.
Right?
It's true.
I mean, as much as like being fearful creates this like sense of control, like the idea of letting go of control is also equally scary.
And it's hard because like I can see the wisdom in your approach, but I just gave myself the answer. I just need to keep all those tools and use them wisely, right? Yeah. So I keep wondering, because since we were pregnant with our first baby, right? We're bombarded with philosophies and approaches, and especially disciplinary tactics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how would you describe your current approach to behavior, and how it's changed from when you started?
I think that the difference, I don't think that, like there's lots of different theories out there, right? So positive parenting and all those kind of things. And they're all tools to help us show up in some way, right? It like drives our actions. But sometimes if your actions seem to be what the experts say they should be, but your feeling and emotion isn't in the right place, then it ends up being pretending. And that's why when you try and implement something that an expert might say and it doesn't seem to work, it's probably because the emotion behind it is not authentic to who you are. So it could be that I want to implement this into my life, but you're doing it from fear or worry or frustration, or from the thought that this will change my teenager. It's just not going to go well. Yeah. Because your head and your heart aren't connected. And I believe that your head and heart being connected is where you can access wisdom, right? Where you can be open to the Spirit's promptings. So if you can get to love and compassion and then decide that that is the right thing to implement, like there's no stopping you. Yeah. Right? Well, everything's in line.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I would tell my early parenting self, is that instead of, well, I know it is because I've talked a lot about this, the whole black and white thinking where there's going to be one right way. Of course, that's completely false, because it varies from parent to parent and kid to kid, all that stuff. But I think that idea of just building a library of tools, like knowing all those different approaches and being able to access those when you need them and mix and match is much more useful than being like, this is my book, this is the way I'm going to do it, and this is, is how I parent.
Yeah.
So,
And you get into trouble. That's how I got into trouble, right? Because I wasn't open to her experience and I wasn't open to even my experience, right? I just had like this tunnel vision and where the answers were like outside the tunnel, but I wasn't even willing to take a look
yeah.
because just had, lots of judgment, shame, frustration, all of those tunnel vision and disconnect us from our inner wisdom. So
Yeah. Wow. So much to think about. I want to end this episode with one last thing Jeannie learned about herself, that her own happiness doesn't have to depend on the happiness or behavior of her children.
I actually thought that I would be irresponsible if I was happy, even though my daughter's pregnant at 15, right? There was a real like cognitive dissonance where I was like, I don't think that it's responsible for me to just be happy and find peace when this terrible thing is happening over here, right? And so I was definitely in the pool with her, being frustrated, annoyed, and, trying to fix her so that I could feel better. And coaching really helped me pull out of that. And, it also has created amazing things in my boys that followed after, right? So because I understand who I am and that I am the creator of my own experience, in turn, so do my boys. They're benefiting from that education that I learned so that they're understanding their identity and that they are unique from me.
Thank you so much for listening to the How She Moms podcast and for being part of this community. There are so many other ways for you to connect and hopefully also contribute. I share tips and ideas regularly on Instagram and Facebook at How She Moms. You can find past episodes and other resources at howshemoms.com. And you can always just email me directly at whitney@howshemoms.com. Special thanks to my own wonderful mom, Susan Singley, for recording my theme music. She played this song all the time when I was growing up, and to me, it's the soundtrack of motherhood.